So welcome. My name's Greg. I use he, him pronouns, and I work with the Maryland Harm Reduction Training Institute, or MaHRTI. At MaHRTI, might seem very obvious at first. We do trainings, but we do a lot more than that. We aim to develop the Maryland harm reduction workforce and support Maryland programs in providing optimal services to people who use drugs. And MaHRTI provides training and technical assistance to peers and people who use drugs. Maryland Department of Health access harm reduction grantees, syringe services programs, and overdose response programs. Now, our team is pretty great. I'm going to introduce them here. I think most of them, or a good amount of them, are on the call. But Zach Hay is our director. Mira C is our associate director. And then there's me, Greg, and Sal, who are our coordinators and trainers. So some ground rules. Already gone over a few before we get started. We're asking everyone to mute their mics. It'll be a lot easier for folks watching this training later if there's not interruptions during the content. Be a respectful human being. This is a judgment-free zone. We ask that folks spread facts, not fiction or gossip. There is a lot of misinformation about Xylazine out there, and it can be difficult to find good, correct information. So be open to learning and be open to what we have here to help you with that. Take care of yourself. We all work in harm. A lot of us work in harm reduction. We carry and deal with a lot of stuff. If you need to take a step out, get some water, breathe, go ahead and do that. Take care of yourself. And final point, underline, period, stop at the end of this. We will not tolerate the stigmatization or demonization of people who use drugs, the drugs they use, and people who sell drugs during this training. I know that this can be a learning process for everyone, so please be open to learning. If you make a mistake, be open to being corrected. There's going to be a lot of abbreviations, as there is whenever public health is included in something during this training. Here's a large list of all the different abbreviations I'm going to go through today. Most of these I will do my best to spell them out for you, but you'll see them on the PowerPoint as the abbreviations. So during this training day, we're going to do a brief overview of what we know about Xylazine. We're going to take a look at Xylazine locally in Maryland, talk a little bit about why taking a look at the local context is so important. We're going to talk about why we test for Xylazine. We're going to do an overview of the test strips themselves. We're going to talk about the instructions for the use of Xylazine test strips. We're going to go over 4 different strips today. And we're going to talk about what a positive test means and how to talk about that on outreach. This is going to be a focus training on Xylazine test strips. I know there may be a lot of questions about Xylazine. We will go over some general facts, but know that our goal here today and our focus is the test strips. So Xylazine, what is it? So first I want to say, like any substance, Xylazine is neutral. It's neither good nor bad. When we put that type of good or bad association with any type of adulterant or cut or substance, what we do is we end up demonizing the substance and criminalizing people who use that substance. We don't want to do that. It's been so obvious recently with fentanyl in the way the media has portrayed fentanyl, in which this demonization comes of fentanyl, and then people who use drugs are criminalized and seen as dangerous when they're not. So Xylazine, it's a veterinary medicine. It's not an opioid. It's not approved for medical use in humans. There was some testing done in the 60s, 70s, where they stopped the testing due to the way folks reacted to it. And it's commonly used in veterinary medicine as a sedative, analgesic, and muscle relaxant. So some common names for Xylazine. On the left of the screen here, well, at least my left of the screen, you're going to see some names. These names specifically refer to Xylazine as a substance, not necessarily other substances that are cut or adulterated with Xylazine. On the other side of the screen, are some more Maryland specific terms. When building this training, I got some input from people who use drugs and talked to them and asked, what are folks saying? What are folks calling it? And most of the time, people said, they don't really hear a specific term for xylazine, and xylazine mixed with other substances, or fentanyl mixes cut with xylazine. Some folks mentioned that they had heard zine. When I asked about the terms like trank dope, a lot of folks said, well, no, I see that in news articles, but I'm not, I don't hear that in my daily life. And I think that's an important designation that we need to know when we're thinking local. So the effects of xylazine. This is a broad topic. We're going to go over it real quick to get to the next stuff. So a lot of folks have probably heard about xylazine giving fentanyl legs. This is a term that came from an ethnographic report in Philadelphia, which is where a lot of the first studies on xylazine in the drugs supply started. What this term means, giving fentanyl legs, it refers to prolonging the duration of the effects of opioids when it is mixed with opioids, extending the period of use between opioids and withdrawal. I've seen all kinds of different time distinctions for this, from extending it about 2 hours to more. I can't give you a definite answer, but know that what we've seen is that it makes it so folks don't withdraw as quickly, which to me, as somebody who's been through that, doesn't sound that bad. Xylazine is also a strong sedative that quickly impacts a person's ability to be aware of their surroundings, especially for those without a tolerance. Like I spoke about before, it is a tranquilizer. It will make you sleepy, especially if you're not used to it. If you don't have any tolerance for it, it's really great, if possible, to be around other folks who can help keep it out. One of the things we hear people talking about a lot recently is wounds associated with xylazine. It often causes skin ulcers when injected, even beyond the site of injection, and missed shots can make skin ulcers worse. And what we're finding is no matter the route of use, xylazine can cause damage to the skin and mucous membranes, resulting in dead tissue that can worsen rapidly, not cared for immediately. This means that we're seeing wounds in more than just injection use. Xylazine may cause a life-threatening drop in the blood's ability to carry oxygen to tissues, and some other symptoms we see included high blood sugar, less bladder control, feeling tired all the time, it is a trank, slower reflexes, trouble swallowing, and really dry mouth. I'm just gonna give a shout out. Someone posted the ethnographic study I was talking about in the chat. Go ahead and take a look if that's interests you. So xylazine in Maryland. We're going to go a little more local now and talk about what we're seeing in Maryland. So, as a lot of folks have probably heard, and for those who haven't, we're increasingly seeing seeing xylazine in the fentanyl and opioid supply across Maryland. The chief medical examiner has noted that there's been a significant increase in the presence of xylazine in deaths resulting from overdose since 2017. And 2018, there's a 331% increase in cases of deaths resulting from overdose where xylazine was present. And recently, some data came out showing that in 2020, regions with the highest proportions of xylazine presence in death resulting from overdose were the upper eastern shore of Maryland, the lower eastern shore, and central Maryland. We're going to talk a little bit more about that here. So there's a program in there's a program in Maryland called RAD, stands for the Maryland Rapid Analysis of Drugs program. What they do, folks can bring used paraphernalia into syringe service programs across the state to send that paraphernalia in to be tested. and receive results about the makeup and the composition of what is found on that paraphernalia. We're going to talk a lot more about this at the end. I just want to give you a basic overview. And from October 2021 to May 2023, let's talk about what they found. So in 1,417 samples that were tested, 40% of those samples contain xylazine. Going to make a special note here. Not all of those samples tested were containing opioids or fentanyl mixtures. The paraphernalia could have been used for multiple different substances and different routes of administration. When it came to the samples that had xylazine present in them, it was most prevalent in samples that also contain fentanyl and other related compounds. Rates really vary across the states. It's important to know that the highest prevalence was in Cecil, which was 85% of the samples out of 265, and Calvert counties, which was 75.5% out of 139 samples. All this being said, it's important to know your local drug supply. When we get to the northeastern shore of Maryland, we're getting closer to Philly. The drug supply shifts a little different than other places in Maryland. We're seeing it come more directly out of Philly, which helps explain the higher rate of xylazine. So a little more about addressing the local. Xylazine being new, well, not new, but now being more addressed, and people are focusing more on it. There's been a lot of great, fantastic guides that have come out from harm reduction groups all across the country. I wanted to add a slide here to take note of those, lift them up, but also note that these guides are often made with the local experience of the people who use drugs in that area, in those communities, which means some of the more specific localized knowledge may be different than what's going on in your community. So an example, a really great guide from the West Coast noted that opioid mixtures containing xylazine might be darker brown or chunkier, flakier, and weird smelling. As I was making this training, I got input from people who use drugs in both Baltimore City and Northeastern Maryland, and asked them, hey, you know, what do you think about this? What do you think about this guide? And right away, they're like, no, completely different drug supply. Some of the things that were noted and they told me is that a lot of the opioid mixtures that people had experiences with that they believe contained xylazine were more flowery and white in color in the Baltimore City. And then some of the folks in Northeastern Maryland noted that sometimes the opioid mixtures with xylazine that they believed to contain xylazine had a bluish or purplish coloring and had the consistency of fine powder. That being said, we want to talk to the folks who are having experiences with these substances to learn more about what's going on. What I have right here will change with the local drug supply changing. So most of all, what we need to do is we need to be listening to people who use drugs, tell us about their experiences. They are the experts, and they will let us know what's going on if we ask and create those relationships. So get a little more into xylazine testing. A few things I want to go over before we go over the strips themselves is just why we test for xylazine. We're going to go over overdose response, knowledge, and options are going to be our three sections. So we're going to start with overdose. It is possible to overdose on xylazine. Xylazine, like I said, is not an opioid, but as we saw with the RAD data, most of the times we see overdoses where xylazine is present. We also see opioids. So naloxone should be administered in case of a suspected overdose. Naloxone still works on all the opioids that may be in that mixture. If someone is unresponsive and their breathing is low or shallow, usually around a little less than around or less than 10 to 12 breaths per minute, or on a pulse oximeter, if the SpO2 reading is under 92%, we want to administer rescue breathing. if anyone's sitting there and saying, "Oh, Greg, what's a pulse ox? I haven't heard of that. I want to learn more about that." Well, I'm gonna send you a little link here and put it in the chat for folks who would like to know more about pulse oxes for responding to overdose. I really love this resource. It goes over how to use them, and it does a great job of addressing the medical racism present in the creation and distribution of pulse oxes. They were made primarily to benefit white bodies. They're a striking example of medical racism, and unfortunately tend to give less accurate results for folks with darker skin hues. So moving on, after giving naloxone with xylazine, we often see that individuals are less likely to be responsive right away. Couple things to keep in mind: put folks in the recovery position, performing the rescue breathing, which is 1 breath every 5 seconds. We want to keep people breathing, even if they are not responding right away, and continue to monitor that breathing. And as soon as my slide goes to the next one, we'll keep going. I think we missed. There we go. Okay. The next part we're going to talk about is knowledge when it comes to testing. So knowledge is power. When I refer to knowledge, I'm talking about the knowledge of knowing what's in the drugs we're using. So xylazine testing can confirm whether xylazine is present or absent in street drugs, or whether someone is actively interested in using xylazine or not. It allows for a better understanding of the source supply, where someone may be getting their substances from, especially if they have a consistent source. If it's an experience they're not looking for, they can talk to folks to find a source that might give a different experience. If it is an experience they're looking for, they can continue to try to keep that source consistent if possible. And it applies opportunities to use safety strategies if we know whether xylazine is present in the substance or not. So some safety practices, a lot of us are going to be familiar with these safety practices. There's a couple things I really want to point out that might be slightly different from the normal ones we hear. So consider using different methods for consuming. This includes booty bumping, snorting, smoking. Really, really important in this is what I talked about with wounds related to xylazine earlier. We are seeing wounds on parts of the body where people are consuming that have mucous membranes. So just to be super clear, the use of substances with xylazine intranasally and or snorting, that's a big word for snorting, we still see wounds going there. So assuming that by not injecting, we are avoiding wounds, we do not want to do that. And we do not want to tell people that they're avoiding the risk of wounds by not injecting. Other things we can do, or we can suggest, is to use more slowly, or use a little bit of weight. We can decrease the frequency of injection or other use, rotate injection sites if you inject, let areas with or without wounds cool down in here, and access wound care services. With all of this, anytime I talk about options or safety strategies, I want to remind people that these are things we present as options. We're not there to force people to use substances differently. We're there to give people information. And then we get to the options that I'm sure we're very familiar with. A lot of us are very familiar with, which is try not to use alone. Use with or near someone who has naloxone. Tell someone or have someone check in with you. Always have naloxone present and ensure others know how to use it. Obtain drugs from a different source if the source you're getting it from is not the experience you're looking for. And do not use is always another option. So some consideration for outreach with xylazine test strips. Very underline, period, and stop. It should not be contingent on receiving any other services. If somebody comes and asks for xylazine test strips to your org, give them xylazine test strips if you have them, and train them on how to use them. Don't expect them to come to an IOP or anything like that. It should not be contingent on receiving any other services. We want to make sure we're distributing test strips to people who are actively using drugs. And when possible, always pair the test strip distribution with naloxone and talk, especially about rescue breathing and teaching rescue breathing. We should already be doing that, but we will emphasize that xylazine may lengthen the time before someone becomes responsive after naloxone use. So we want to encourage folks to continue to check breathing. A few more considerations, like I talked about before with all the myths surrounding xylazine. We're not demonizing xylazine. It's neutral. Substances are neutral. We're not using scare tactics. They're not information. We're trying to share the most accurate information as possible. Messaging universal caution. Remember that 40% of samples of all the paraphernalia, which included different substances tested by RAD between October 2021 and May 2023, contains xylazine, and we want to prioritize naloxone distribution to people who are at most risk to overdose and people who are likely to be with them. Remember, we need to let people know xylazine is not an opioid, but opioids are almost always present, and they should proceed with administering naloxone. Okay, now that we've gone through all the general information about xylazine, we're going to get a little more in depth on the test strips and talk a little bit about them themselves. So, XTS or xylazine test strips are new. The style of test is not new, but testing, one specifically focused on testing for xylazine, are newer, and the proper dilution of water and substance used for the test may change over time as the adulterants or the cuts in the local drug supply change. Recommendations to best practices with xylazine test strips will change, and current recommendations for testing mirror the fentanyl test strip instructions, if you're familiar with those. And when testing, folks can use the same solution for both xylazine test strips and fentanyl test strips. So if you're mixing up the water and some powder, you can use that same mix, put both strips in, and get it done. So today we're going to cover 4 different test strips. I know a lot of the folks throughout Maryland mostly have experience with these ones. If we're not talking about a test today that your org is using, please reach out and let me know. I would love to be able to add that for the PDF version of these slides when they go up after. So today we're going to talk about the BTNX XCS, or the rapid response strips. Those are the ones that are greenish, yellow-greenish. I'm partially colorblind, so forgive me if I say a color of a supply and it's actually brown and not green. We're going to talk about the Premier Biotech XTS test strips, which are marketed as Safe X, the Dance Safe xylazine test strips, and the Wise Batch xylazine test strips. So before we even get started, it's important we talk about the manufacturing and distributing of test strips. The way it works, I got to explain on this page, but to make it super simple is a manufacturer makes the strips and then they send it out to different companies to distribute those strips. When xylazine test strips are manufactured by the same group, even if they are distributed with different names by different companies, often those strips have the same testing instructions, limitations, and best practices. A great example of this is the BTNX and Wise Batch strips. They're both manufactured by MaHRTI and have the same instructions. What's so important about this is if someone comes up to you or you get access to test strips, a test strip you've never seen before, and you can look at the name, say, you're used to using the BTNX strips, but you got a Wise Batch strip today. Being able to find out, if possible, that they're both made by MaHRTI, you can use those BTNX instructions. I will say a lot of instructions for test strips are the same, but A really good note is finding out who the manufacturer is. I'm going to tell you straight up that almost every company that is distributing test strips is not going to be transparent with who distributes, where their test strips are made, other than DanSafe and the BTNX test strip, WHPM test strips. I'm sorry. So just to give you a little hints and a little start, from what I know, what I was able to gather, and MaHRTI was able to gather from folks before this training, the XCF strips manufactured by MaHRTI are the BTNX Xylazine test strips and the WISE batch. They are the same test strips. And then the XCS strips manufactured by WHPM are DanSafe Xylazine test strips. Like I said, DanSafe has been transparent about where they get their strips. Other companies usually are not. And a note on this is the Premier Biotech Safe X strips. I can't give you an answer today on where those are manufactured. A lot of folks have done a lot of digging trying to figure that out, and Biotech hasn't been forthcoming about that. So now into testing materials needed. Some of you might be familiar with this from the fentanyl test strips. Of course, you need the test strips. You need scoops or some way to scoop the powder, a clean container, really great for clean containers or unused cokers or bottle caps, a timer. Phones are great for that, and water. A note that when we get the test strip pouches, these materials are not usually included, but harm reduction orgs, many of them already do, but it's great to make up little outreach bags with these supplies in them. So note before testing, for all the tests, we want to make sure all of our equipment is at room temperature, if possible, before testing. I know that is not always possible for everybody when they're testing. And then always check the expiration date on the strip itself. So before you hear me go over it, we get to watch this fun video. If the sound does not come through on this video, know that it's just kind of a little jingle, elevator music, and all the information is written and there's no speaking. Okay, we're going to go over a lot of what you just saw in the video. Now, we're going to go over the 4 different tests. When it comes to the exact numbered instructions, we're going to move a little fast because they're very similar, but I will note the differences. And these, as was already asked in the chat, these slides are going to be available afterwards for you to reference by going into the course itself. So the AssureTech manufactured test strips, which are the BTNX rapid response or the WISE batch test strips. Currently, it's only recommended to use both of these test strips for testing opioid mixtures. Lidocaine was identified as a substance that can lead to false positives in the field in 2 recent studies. And cocaine not cut with lidocaine produced accurate results. Lidocaine is most often we see mixed as a cut with cocaine, but RAD data has shown it to be present in synthetic opioid mixtures. Now, the level of lidocaine that's necessary to produce a false positive may or may not be present in those mixtures, but I recommend being aware of that. So testing with these strips. As you saw in the video, we're mixing 10 milligrams of the substance with 5 milliliters of water or 1 teaspoon in a clean container. Like I said, we can be using a cooker or a cap of water for that. A really great reference for folks is that 10 milligrams is enough to cover Abraham Lincoln's hair on a penny. I don't love recommending the penny example, but it's also an easy, a lot of folks can get access to pennies, but a big recommendation, what I would do and what I have done is when I give out test strips, printing out a sheet of paper with a 1-to-1 scale penny on it in the kit is a lot better than folks using pennies. We know how dirty pennies get. Having the piece of paper to scale can help folks. So then we remove the test strip from the pouch, holding the strip on the colored end where XYL is written. We dip the white end or the end that's marked for dipping into the prepared water and substance mix. We want to dip it so the water mix reaches inside the wavy lines, which I'll show you in a second, but not far enough that it reaches the solid line. It takes about 10 to 15 seconds in the water. Going to remove the strip and put it on a non-absorbent surface on top of the cooker or the bottle cap is great, and wait for 5 minutes for the results. And it's recommended for the any of the tests manufactured by AssureTech, both the BTNX or WISE batch, not to read the results after 10 minutes. So reading results, as we saw in the video, this is kind of the opposite of a COVID test, which I know a lot of us are familiar with. I always like to tell people the COVID test is the opposite of a fentanyl test strip test, because I was using those before I was using COVID tests. So we've got 2 lines. One is the testing line and one is the control line. T is testing, C is control. If there's one line and that line is the line closest to the colored part of the strip, we have a test that is reactive or positive, meaning it detected xylazine in the substance. 2 lines, both the test and control line, means that it's negative or xylazine was not detected. Word of warning, a lot of folks have commented on the negative line or test line can be very, very hard to see. It can be very faint, so make sure you're really paying attention to that. And then an invalid test is one where the line or the control line with the line marked C that's closest to the colored end of the strip is not there. The test line might be there, but the control line is not. That means the test is invalid and you should go ahead and use another strip. Okay, the Premier Biotech test strips. A lot of folks in Maryland will probably become familiar with these pretty soon. They're marketed, they say Safe X on the bag. They're marketed as Safe X. The state procurement for xylazine test strips in Maryland for fiscal year 2023 is with Premier Biotech. So when Maryland ORPs or SSPs reach out and order xylazine test strips from Access Harm Reduction, they will be receiving the Premier Biotech strips. Note that field testing and validity, validity studies on premier biotech test strips are forthcoming. Studies are currently underway using rad samples by the National Institute of Technology and Health. This is not an uncommon thing. I'll tell you that now the testing has become a little more normalized throughout the medical field and public health. A lot of companies have begun producing test strips, which make it a little more difficult for those of us working in the field, because before there was only a few test strips and it was easy for folks in harm reduction to share information and say, hey, we tested these strips, these were all results. There being so many more test strips now being produced, that's a little harder for all of these strips to get tested. Just know that these studies are RAD, or the Rapid Analysis of Drugs Program in Maryland, is working on providing those studies. And currently, like the other tests we've talked about, it's only recommended to use these strips for opioid mixtures. So testing with the Premier Biotech test strips are very similar to BTNX. It's 10 milligrams of substance with 5 milligrams of water, 1 teaspoon, and mixed. Removing the test strip from the pouch and holding the white end marked for dipping end into the prepared water substance mix. We're holding it there for 10 to 15 seconds, remove the strip, put it on a non-absorbent surface, and wait for 5 minutes to read the results. Once again, do not read the results after 10 minutes if possible, and interpretation of the results is the same. This is what Biotech shows on their informational sheet. 2 lines, testing and control, is negative. Just the control line and no test line is positive. A test line and no control line, or no lines at all, is an invalid test. Use another test. And know that the test line can be very faint. And WHPM, or DanceSafe Xylazine test strips. DanceSafe itself has come out and recommended only using these test strips to test for opioid mixtures right now. Recent laboratory analysis, when I was talking about the validity test, there we go, validity. The validity testing is these laboratory analysis, if I didn't explain it well enough the first time, in which folks are using rapid testing, rapid analysis to see what comes up as a false positive, what comes up as positive correctly, to see how accurate the tests are. And then field testing is exactly what it sounds like, testing it in the field. And then testing those substances to see if the strips are accurate. So for the DanceSafe strips, ketamine and levamisole both resulted in false positives at times. And levamisole is another one that we often see cut into cocaine, but it has been present in synthetic opioid mixtures. Testing, once again, most of the xylazine test strips are very similar. I just wanted folks to be able to jump on these slides if they had them and be able to look at them if they needed to have instructions for the test specifically, or give somebody else them. So mixing 10 milligrams with 5 milligrams of water, 1 teaspoon, taking the test strip out of the pouch, holding color end and dipping the dotted line or the white end marked for dripping into the water. We hold for 15 seconds, and then we remove the strip and put it on a non-absorbent surface. This instructions were just slightly different here than some of the others. Test strips were DanceSafe recommended waiting 3 minutes instead of the 5 to read the results. Reading the results, same as all the other strips. We got 2 lines. Testing and control is a negative, or no xylazine present. Once again, this line can be very faint and hard to see. And then 1 line, if it is the control line, is positive. If 1 line, it's only the testing line, it's an invalid test, or if there's no lines, it's invalid. Use another test. So what we were talking about there was primarily testing powdered opioid mixtures. But I want to talk a little bit about testing pressed opioid pills and tablets. There's something called the chocolate chip cookie effect. I know that I talked about substances being neutral. Chocolate chip cookies are not. They're wonderful, in my opinion. And I was very happy to add this clip on in here. I spent a lot of time on Google finding the best cookie. So I hope you enjoyed my cookie picture. But to the point, little sidetracked. When we're testing a pill before using, we want to make sure we are testing the entire pill. Why is that? Because of the chocolate chip cookie effect. I don't know if you can see my mouse cursor. I believe you can. But imagine this cookie as a pressed opioid pill. The doughy areas, those are the opioid mixtures. The little chocolate chips could be the areas in which there is xylazine. Pressed pills will not have a complete mixture most of the time of xylazine all throughout the pill. Same with other cuts. It might be just in different sections. So we want to always be testing the amount we are using if possible. Know that the liquid can be consumed orally after the testing to achieve the desired effect. It is also possible to do a couple other things, but we're not going to go over that today. And we want to make sure we're really crushing the pills into a fine powder and not check chunks before we test. And then I have some little chart here. I want everyone to know that this is based off a pill the size of an M30 oxycodone. For those not familiar, it's a small blue pill with an M on it. I know sometimes they can be speckled in slightly different colors, but when we're testing the entire pill, 4 tablespoons or 1/4 cup of water, half a pill, 1/8 or 2 tablespoons, and a fourth of the pill, we should be using 1 tablespoon of water. Okay, so we went over all the test strips, and we talked about positive test strips, but what does that actually mean? How do I actually talk about getting a positive, having a test strip that comes up positive when I'm on outreach and when I'm talking with folks, when I'm talking about my friends? So they know, because we also talk about how there's false positives. How do we treat that? How do we think about that? So samples that test positive should always be treated as containing xylazine when considering use. Like I've said, for all the other strips, we only want, right now, I can only recommend using XTS strips for testing opioid mixtures. There is some great work being done on the West Coast by harm reduction orgs who have been testing different stimulants using the xylazine test strips, doing field testing, trying to figure out the best practices for doing that, the amount of water, what will bring false positives. But that is a different drug supply on the West Coast. And those instructions are going to be different. And right now, can only recommend using the test strips for opioid mixtures. So, like I said, the technology is not new, but xylazine test strips are new and false positives are possible. We don't want to just tell people that that there's no such thing as a false positive or anything like that. We want to talk to folks and explain that it is possible to have a false positive, but we should still be treating it as containing xylazine when considering use. Like I said, lidocaine and levamisole are 2 of the big ones of substances that are cut in other substances that can show false positives, and RAD testing has shown both of these present in synthetic opioid mixtures in Maryland. So, like I said, what we always want to do is give accurate information about the limits of xylazine test strips when we're distributing them on outreach and talking to our friends about that. And what a positive test could mean. I talked to some folks who got some input from folks my area who use drugs, who really wanted me to add some of the below information to this PowerPoint. So we're going to talk about it. So inaccurate information about xylazine test strips can lead to misunderstandings between people who use drugs and where they obtain their drugs. Opioid mixtures can be cut with different adulterants multiple times as they travel from production to the hands of people who use drugs. This makes it very difficult or impossible for people who sell drugs to know everything that it is in the product they are distributing. And finally, we're going to talk a little bit more about RAD, or the Maryland Rapid Analysis of Drugs program. It is a program where SSP participants or Stone Service participants in Maryland can bring their used paraphernalia to be tested through direct analysis and real-time mass spectrometry, or DART-MS. I am not a chemist. Those are a lot of big words. It's a big machine that spins and tests drugs for what is in the substances and gives very accurate results. The substances will not be tested that day. They're sent off for testing. It allows for people to have a more detailed picture of what is in the drugs they're getting and where what might be a more consistent source for them for an experience that they are looking for. All the testing is confidential and no personal information required. And there are currently 16 syringe service programs in Maryland that participate in this program. This next slide here will show you all of them. I'm also, looking up on the top of my screen. I'm going to link, once we get into the questions, the link for the map of SSPs in Maryland, which will note which SSPs participate in RAD. And that being said, that is all I have for the training today.